Good evening. I'm Cynthia Elliott, Vice President of the Rochester Board of Education, actually assuming the lead for our President, Van White, who is out of town. He lost his mother, so he's in Atlanta, should be at this moment, to um, um, do the funeral for his mother. And so we do extend our warmest condolences to President White and his family. We also want to acknowledge, we had here at the Rochester City School District a death of a student at one of our schools. And so we would love to take a moment of silence for our student. If you would, please, just a moment of silence. Thank you very much. And so we will start. I need to get the agenda. Let me just pull that up. I thought I had it, but I don't. So Cal, you please tell me what is on the agenda?
We have next door speakers for tonight.
Okay.
Okay. And I will take it from here if you don't mind.
Thank you.
Sure. So tonight we have two speakers with us. Our first speaker is a parent, Kilolo Moya White, who will be speaking about the school budget allocation. And Ms. Moya White should be joining us momentarily. Good evening.
Good evening.
Good evening. Whenever you're ready, you have 3 minutes, Ms. Moya White.
Thank you so much. Good evening. My name is Kilolo Moya White, and I'm a parent leader. The last time I had an opportunity to speak before this board, our scholars and families were, to me, in a very different place. So first, let me thank each of you in the ways in which you have shown a commitment to the needs of the families, the scholars, and the community members. So thank you. My sons have truly enjoyed going back into school. If 2020 did not teach us anything, I feel like as a nation, it really taught us to remind us of what is important, to remember the little things, to remind us to cherish the moment, that the time is the only thing that none of us can change and none of us can get back. We need to remember to cherish the moment that we spend with our children as families, to hold them close, to share also the principles that we value most, and what happens with our children to help our children to be successful. I feel that it's important for us to identify and to understand that it's important that we all are able to hold each other accountable, hold each other accountable as scholars, to hold us as parents accountable in the home, to hold our teachers accountable in the classrooms, our administrators to hold them accountable, and community members, and then looking at you as our board. It's important for you to know that the community is working and that parents are organizing, parents are networking, parents are creating coalitions to ensure that parent voice is at the center of conversations right now in our city. And specifically, I think it's important to note that our parents are activated, that we want to make sure that youth voice and parent voice are at the center of the budgetary conversations that are happening in our school district. We know that there are plans for the future. Like, what are those plans for 2022, right? 2021, 22, next year. What does that look like for our children? We want to be a part of those conversations. As parents, we demand that our voice be a part of the conversation and say, how is the school district going to address learning loss this summer? What are the programs that are going to be available for our children? Those are the things that I believe are on the hearts of the families in the RCSD. And I am a product of the RCSD because I have two sons that attend School 23, and I'm very proud to be a RCSD parent. So thank you for allowing me to speak this evening. But as a board, I ask you, how will you address these plans? How will you address these communities' concerns around the budget and ensuring that parents are a part of that conversation? Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Moya White. We appreciate your comments tonight. Our last speaker is a staff member, Claire Labrosa, who will be joining us to discuss budget priorities. Ms. Labrosa, welcome.
Hi, thank you.
All right, whenever you're ready, you have 3 minutes.
Oh, 3 today. Okay, great. So my name is Claire Labrosa. I'm a parent of 3 children, and my heart goes out to the family of the student that passed. I'm a resident in the city of Rochester, a graduate of the RCSD, and a teacher in the district. After the recent announcement that the RCSD will be receiving $200 million from the federal stimulus, I think it's important that we don't continue to slash our budgets and sabotage our future success. I'm here today to highlight some of my budget priorities, and I hope this inspires our community of parents, students, and educators to come forward and share their priorities as well. Each school has different needs and wants, and each PTO and school community should be given the autonomy to make budget decisions that fit their needs. We need social workers to meet the needs of our students. The National Association of Social Workers recommends a ratio of 1 social worker for every 50 students. The RCSD has a current ratio 6 times that, with 1 social worker for every 320 students. We need fully staffed kitchens serving healthy, hot meals. No more green lunch meat. Let kitchens actually cook and bring back our Bente workers. We need before and after school care for all students who need it. We need fully funded arts and enrichments in every single school building. We need world languages. When I was an RCSD student, we had Spanish starting in kindergarten. And we currently have 1 elementary school in the entire district that offers a world language. And our students get art, music, and library for only 25% of the school year. We need new playgrounds at every school and recess available for students in middle and high school as well. All kids need to move their bodies, and research shows they thrive when they are able to do so. We need a real trade school with hands-on practice for our students. RCSD kids are overwhelmingly denied access to BOCES technical programs and have no access to trades until after they graduate. Thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Ms. Labrosa. And Vice President Elliott, that concludes the speakers portion of this evening's meeting.
Thank you, Callian. So I'll turn it over now to our Finance Chair, Commissioner Beatrice LeBron, for the presentations of the budgets. Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you. So before we go into the presentations, I do want to bring another budget calendar amendment request to the board. And so just to give everyone, including the community who's listening, just some background on budget deliberations. And so the deliberation process is a major component of the district's budget season. It is the process by which board members are able to publicly question administration regarding the major components of the budget. Traditionally, the RCSD deliberations process is hosted round robin style, where commissioners pose questions to the superintendent and her team, guided strictly by each section of the budget book. And this year, in order to increase transparency and to make the process a more user-friendly for the public to follow along, because I know it gets complicated, we are taking a themed approach to the deliberation process. So while sections of the book are still the main, are still the main feature, we will review the budget by department and units. So before each round robin session, the administration will represent their department by providing a brief overview of their unit's priorities for the upcoming year. They will also explain how their expenditures reflect the priorities set forth in the strategic plan, the academic plan, and the financial plans. Following this, we will host the questions and answers review, and then deliberation sessions review details will go as followed. On Tuesday, April 6th, we'll do a deliberation on operational and general support budget. And this deliberation will specifically cover operations and maintenance and transportation, general support, communications, IT, and legal, budget and debt services, and human capital and employee benefits. On Wednesday, April 7th, instructional and special education budget deliberation sessions will occur, and this deliberation session will cover teaching and learning. So academics through pre-K, general education, arts and athletics, student support services, placement, attendance, the Department of Multi-Language Learners and Multicultural Education, and parent engagement and special education. And as a result of taking this thematic approach, we realized that we needed to add a third deliberation session dedicated solely to the school's budgets. And so we will utilize the time set aside for the final budget discussions in the April 20th Finance Committee of the Whole to host these conversations that will cover school profiles and budgets, including East EPO's budget. Does anybody have any questions about that? Okay, so I do need a motion to amend so that we can add a third deliberation on that April 20th
So moved.
date.
Second.
Thank you. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 Aye. Kalia, did you get it? Thank you. And so with that stated, I am going to, let me look at my schedule. I believe that Superintendent Dr. Nelms is up first.
Thank
So I'm
you.
going to turn it over to you, Sean.
All right, thanks, Commissioner LeBron. And good evening, everyone. Good evening, community. Tonight is going to be the first of many conversations about the budget at East. And so I'm going to try to go slowly tonight so that key questions can be formed and asked and answered.
Actually, Sean, Dr. Nelms, I'm sorry. I do want to point out to the board and to the community that we actually will not be taking questions tonight. So this is a high overview of your presentation. I'm going to ask individuals to hold off on their questions for tonight so we can process everything that you're saying, everything that Dr. Myers-Smalls is saying, but also the budget books should have all been delivered today to everyone. And so if there are questions that come up, if you want to write them down and submit them through the board question log, we can take them that way, or you can hold on to those questions as we go through the deliberations as well. So I apologize. I just want to put that out there so that the expectation is set for you as well, that you don't have to answer our questions tonight.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No, thanks for clear. Yeah, and as I was saying, I'm going to go nice and slow so that people can form questions for later. Yep, next slide, please. So just for the community, and I know that we've had some new board members and new folks involved in this whole process. I just want to kind of give some context to get us started, and then I will end with some programmatic discussions around the upcoming year and then the next few years as well. Just for context, last year, the Board of Education Resolution 734 agreed to extend the EPO up to 5 years. And we are very thankful for that. I think the progress of East has been well documented, and it goes beyond the academic performance. It's really an improvement to the culture and climate of the school community, but also the surrounding community itself. We are moving much more aggressively towards having a neighborhood school with community school values, meaning that kids from around the community are attending more and more. At one point, we had less than 5% of our kids attending East who live near East, and now that number is around 50%. But also we have the community school aspect, meaning there are pipelines that will create opportunities for kids beyond high school as they move into college and career. We are all aware of the various career and technical education courses that are offered there, including teaching and precision optics and manufacturing and information technology. The list goes on and on, culinary, and then also the health careers. And that's a direct partnership with the School of Nursing and in the Medical Center at the University of Rochester. The school board approved a budget that was based on the 2019-20 school year, which I'll talk to in a little bit. And we knew that last year was a critical time financially for the district. And we decided, and we partnered with the superintendent at that point and the school board, and we volunteered to slash our budget by about 20%. And it was really clear during that time that that was a temporary reduction. And I also would say that COVID kind of helped that number be a little more stable because we didn't have the operation costs. We weren't buying things like toilet paper and things like that. We also had savings in transportation and food service, et cetera. So the impact of that budget for this year would have been a lot worse than it could have been had it not been for, unfortunately, the pandemic. But we also know that the pandemic has caused a lot of students to disengage academically and has created a new challenge for us as we enter September of 2021. And that's how do we recover students who have interrupted learning? How do we get kids back on track academically? And then how do we continue to accelerate learning in ways that provide students a rich opportunity for them to be successful beyond their time in high school? And so we face those challenges for the rest of this school year, but also entering September. And I believe the budget that we have moving forward will help us to catch up students and provide some remediation, but also accelerating those students who are at or above grade level already. Next slide. Just to remind the board members of how those savings were calculated for the 2021 school year, that's the current school year. Here's a list of the things that were in section 7 of the 2020-21 school year, a budget book, which totaled about almost $5 million in savings. In addition to this, we anticipate having additional funds returning to the district, again, because we have not had some of the operation costs, because we've been in a remote learning environment, because we have some other costs we would have had with after school support that we didn't offer since from September to March, and also some of the contractual costs with teachers and professional development after school, which we weren't able to do. Next slide. We weren't able to. I also want to give a historic nature of our savings. If you look at the time that the East has been, since the University of Rochester has partnered with East, we have returned yearly a pretty significant amount of funds. And in the first 3 years, that was done because we had federal funds and grants that we were awarded. We were able to not use general funds for that. By years 4 and 5, what we realized is that we were not retaining students. We had more and more students graduating and moving forward. I'm sorry, this is my daughter has her new license, and she's calling me for some reason, and it's making me a little nervous right now because she should not be calling me. She has my car. You'll see that the budget, we return a significant amount of money to our budget year after year, and we continue to do that for the 2021 school year. And so we're excited that we are being fiscally responsible and prudent, and that we will continue to do so in being stewards of the funding that the board and the state and the federal government has given us. Next slide. And so it's also incredibly important to let the community know why receivership is so important. It was created years ago to really insulate a school improvement effort. In this case, it's a university's role at East from conditions outside of its control. Sometimes that's federal, sometimes it's state, it even might be local. And this is important because it really means that our budget is managed in a way that should not impede the district's efforts. And the same could be true, and we talked about this in the past also, that the district's fiscal decisions should not impact that of the EPO. And so together we are moving towards our own goals, and we might at times seem like it's separate or it's collaborative, but from the funding perspective, those are two separate financial lanes, if you will, that we try to stay in. But again, last year we realized that the budget for the district had some problems, and so we did adjust ours to help support the overall budget. So we do those things, but the intent of receivership was really to create two distinct pathways towards school improvement, and that we will continue to be fiscally responsible as we move forward. Next slide. As we discussed the 21-22 budget, I just want to take us back to the approved budget, which is based on that 2019-20 school budget, and that's a budget of $22,209,911. For the upcoming year, I am proposing that we reduce our budget by 8.2%. This again is to, part of the reduction is because we feel like we have a pretty strong academic program. And we also know, well, this was created before we got the federal relief funds coming to the district, but we also think that, it's not our goal to spend every single dollar if we don't need that. We do know that in the upcoming years, as we expand our enrollment and as we take on more students, that we would be able to give less and less. But for the upcoming year, it would be irresponsible for me to spend the entire thing if it's the entire allotment, if it's not needed. This budget will refocus our energy on programs and systems and structures like our freshman academy. We know if students don't move from 9th to 10th grade, they are more likely to not be successful in graduating with their cohort. We have to go back to a literacy-rich environment. We know that students enter East often with levels of literacy that are some of the lowest in our community, and that we have to double down on our literacy teachers. We also understand that the importance of social-emotional learning, and so we need to re-engage our kids. And this budget has us going back to our original plan, and that's giving students not just an academically rich environment, but also one that is socially, emotionally, and culturally sustaining. We also have worked with the district and with the school board and the state for some years now in developing a program that would expand the number of students with disabilities that attend East. And there's a slide that I'm going to show you in a second that goes into a little more depth about that program. Keeping in mind that our school has been under construction, so we could not expand enrollment. But entering the 21-22 school year, our building will be fully accessible. All classrooms will be open, and we won't be living in 2/3 of the building as we have been for the last 4 years. The next slide, it talks about expanding our programs. You'll see that we added programs this current year, even through COVID, and we'll continue to add programs to East over the next several years. When you add programs that require a larger number of students and additional staff because of the needs of some of our students, it comes with a cost. So the next slide is just for the board to understand that we are not only thinking about the program side. Next slide, please. Not only the program slide, but also the fiscal impact of adding these particular programs. So when you have, for example, a 12-1-3 program would be 12 students with 1 teacher and 3 teaching assistants or teacher aides. Each program comes with not just a small teacher to student ratio, but it often requires some additional support from teaching assistants and teaching aides. And as we fully integrate students, meaning that they're not going to have separate classrooms, but they're going to have to be in classrooms that like physical education, that's PE, music, art, technology, health, and speech. Sometimes you have to add additional staffing to accommodate that. And you'll see that the total cost of that over the course of those 3 years becomes costly, but these numbers are also budgeted it's also included within our budget. So we're trying to increase the number of students, increase the number of services without negatively impacting our budget. But you'll see that, again, in 2 or 3 years, we'll have less room to give back funds because we'll be funding programs that we're planning for now. And that's just how I've always budgeted. I always think 3 years out with our budget. I always think 3 years out with our programs, and then try to create a fiscal plan that accommodates each, that doesn't put a strain on the overall school community. The next slide just says that we are going to get back to the basics. We have to get back to the basics. COVID has created some fragmentation within our programs and services. And these bullets, I'm not going to read each of them. It's just it's a significant lift, but it also represents the core value of our programs and services at East. And the final 2 slides just really talk to the importance of sharing the work. That's also part of the EPO model. It was designed to be able to not only be insulated to create school improvement, but also to share that improvement more widely. We'll continue to do that with the RCSD, and we'll continue to do that with other local schools as well. And so in closing, the last slide, the total budget for 21-22 is a reduction, as I said, about 8.2%. It's also important to note in that second bullet that our total budget entering 21-22 is actually lower than our first year when we started in 2015-16, just as an indication that we continue to be stewards financially and trying to make sure that we are spending only what's required for the EPO and that we return as much money as we can so that the district will have it for its reserves and or other programs and services for other schools. These reductions that we have in this budget includes salary and benefits, also the cost of living increases. Again, thinking 3 years out, you have to think about those things also. What would be the cost of staffing 3 years from now? And we will continue to watch our master schedule to determine how many teachers we need for the number of kids that we have, our contractual obligations, and also accounting for our scholar success and being fiscally accountable. And that concludes my presentation. Thank you.
Thank you. Up next is Dr. Leslie Myers-Smalls, who's going to be giving the overview of the rest of our CSD's budget presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. Certainly good evening to Vice President Elliott, to all of our commissioners, to our staff, and to our community. It is my pleasure to discuss the 2021-2022 proposed budget. And this presentation will be conducted by both myself and CFO Carlene Pierce. To start this conversation and this discussion, we certainly have to focus on the strategic plan, because really that is the baseline and the context for, for our discussions. And I'm very grateful and appreciative to the board for approving unanimously our strategic plan in the fall. And I really want to call your attention to our vision to ensure that all students have equitable access to a high quality education and graduate each student as a productive member of our society. So that's our aspirational goal, and the expectation that we have that when we work together collectively and collaboratively, that will occur in our district. If you look at our core beliefs, you see that we are very intentional by starting with the statement that students are our first priority and that they drive each one of the decisions that we make in the district. And then you can read the next several, but then the last one really is apropos for our discussions tonight, in that we will make each fiscal and resource allocation decision equitably, transparently, and in the best interest of students. And that's certainly the goal of this proposed budget. Our strategic plan also has 4 key priorities that undergird our budget as well. And that is to certainly provide high quality learning experiences for each one of our scholars, to ensure an inclusive, caring, and safe and learning environment, to build strong community, and to foster dynamic leadership. So as you hear my presentation tonight, those 4 priorities will echo throughout the focus and the priorities that we are budgeting and placing an emphasis on. So as we look at the development process for our budget, there were really 4 areas that guided this process. We certainly wanted to ensure that we attained a balanced budget, and that is critical. Number 2, we also needed to shift the financial culture in our district and to ensure that there were systems and structures in place that guided the way that that finances occur in the Rochester City School District. We certainly have our priorities, which include the strategic plan. IM stands for Independent Monitor Academic Plan, and the Independent Financial Plan. And if you remember a few weeks ago, I did review the academic and financial plan progress. And so we do have to fulfill those responsibilities. Those are non-negotiables that we must adhere to, the 96 recommendations between those 2 plans. And then we also need to be very mindful and address the fact that enrollment is declining in the Rochester City School District. As far as attaining a balanced budget, there has been much work that's occurred in this area. And we've shared these concepts or these strategies with the board and the public before. Certainly the new budget transfer policy and the enhanced procurement policy. We had significant oversight over in the monitoring of both expenditures and revenues. We have looked very carefully at our vendor contracts, and we continue because we know that there are additional areas that we can review and make adjustments. And just as a reminder, with our vendor contracts, we looked at how each one of those vendors were going to be able to continue to deliver services in a completely remote environment. And so adjustments were made in that regard. We had a spending and hiring freeze, and then we need to have been mindful about continued restoration of a fund balance. So should we have emergencies or things that come up, that we have a place to go. So when we look at shifting the financial culture in the Rochester City School District, there are 7 areas that we are focusing on. We certainly need to be mindful of our short-term debt. And so our plan is to reduce the RAN, or Revenue Anticipation Note, from $85 million to $50 million for this year. When we talk about the transportation contract, we have been able to initiate a new relationship with a transportation provider to bring not only competition to the marketplace, but we're also excited about the opportunities and the flexibility that the new arrangement brings to our district. Substitute expenditures have been an area that we also needed to be mindful of. Among other expenditures posing concerns, substitute expenditures have been cited in the June 5th letter to both the City of Rochester and the Board of Education. And Commissioner LeBron has made it very clear that we need to adhere to the advice of the OSC. And so also our independent monitor recommended that we need to adhere to that. So we did do that. BOCES and special education is a huge driver in Rochester City School District. So following the July 2020 meetings, we did have 21 students return to the Rochester City School District. But as you are aware, this is really a very delicate process that has to be finessed. We just can't have conversation with families and say, your son, your daughter, your child is going to come back. And so we continue to monitor this process, and we continue to work to develop programs that meet the needs of students within the Rochester City School District. We know that it's so important to ensure that we have the least restrictive environment. And so we will continue to work with both these programs to return more Rochester City School District students to their respective home schools, as well as district-based programs. Medicaid reimbursements. We know that delivery of service has been significantly impacted by COVID, but we have made much progress in this area in 1, ensuring that staff are trained, that 2, structures are in place to address concerns, and processes are in place to address non-compliance, because that has been problematic. There is ongoing collaboration in place with special education and Medicaid staff in improving our ability to appropriately bill for the services that are provided. Charter school enrollment has been a huge concern in the Rochester City School District, as well as other Big 5 school districts across our state. And we also know that this is a major advocacy point for the Board of Education. So during this particular school year, we did see an increase of Rochester City School District students enrolling in charter schools. So at the end of last year, the enrollment was about 6,200, and currently the enrollment is a little over 6,700. So that's a difference of about 530 students. 6th grade is the grade level that we saw the most significant increase, going from about 400 to 570. And kindergarten currently has a registration of 637. Lastly, we've been continuing to leverage grants in shifting our financial culture. And under previous leadership, there was significant shifting of positions into grants. And so we want to say of particular note is proposed supplemental FTEs. So it's those individuals, those staff that provide direct supports to students and staff across schools, such as intervention, prevention teachers, reading teachers, teachers on assignment, and instructional coaches. So that's approximately 130 positions projected for the 21-22 school year. Additionally, we have maximized title funds by reviewing the FTEs that are under consideration for being reduced, and we've pulled them into title grants if eligible. An example of this includes 6.0 FTE ROC restorative teachers on assignment in the Student Support Services Department. And then finally, as a cost avoidance measure, eligible new expenditures for next school year were taken into title grants to the greatest extent possible, because unfortunately, Rochester has not always maximized title grants, and we've actually left money on the table, and we don't want to do that. So we have taken recommendations from Dr. Jallo's academic plan, as well as the strategic plan to focus on MTSS, or multi-tiered systems of supports, and also to create leadership academies for aspiring both school and central office leaders, so we can develop a strong pipeline that we've been talking about. So what are some of the district priorities that we are focusing our budget on? Certainly, we know that as we continue to implement the New York State Next Generation standards, and there is much work that needs to occur relative to the alignment of curriculum. So updating K-12 materials that support not only curriculum, but also instruction and assessment, so CIA. So this helps to ensure that teacher planning materials are aligned to the next generation standards. That takes time and it takes work. Teachers will have strong unit and lesson plan examples. Additionally, formative assessments and suggestions for determining student progress will be included. Over $800,000 has been added to this year's budget to fortify the work that's being done in this area. We continue to fortify social emotional learning and restorative practices as more and more of our scholars begin to come back to school, to brick and mortar attendance. We know that we need those supports in place. And so we are supporting the ROC restorative team members at about $800K. If you also remember, we have a consent decree. So that is specifically directly related to special education. But we not only have consent decree, we also have the special education and bilingual corrective action plans, or CAPS. And so we added almost $800,000 in teaching staff, 12 positions total, to provide content instruction to ELs with disabilities as the need arises, and to avoid gaps in compliance with CR Part 154, which directly relates to EL students. And just a little bit of a side note, we just have to continue to be mindful of the possibility that we will have an influx of students into the Rochester city, into the Rochester community, because we are a sanctuary city. Additionally, I think everyone knows that we have over 65 beautiful languages that are spoken by our scholars in the Rochester City School District. So we are fortifying this area with about $176,000 to employ individuals who speak 8 different languages. These staff will allow the district to better serve our families by our capacity to provide interpretation services, document translations, home language support, and increase cultural knowledge of the 8 language groups, the 8 major language groups represented in our district. As far as the independent monitor academic plan, I've noted that we are going to update district-wide curricular materials, textbooks, and assessment tools. We're going to establish program evaluation to arm the program evaluation arm to analyze the effectiveness of initiatives. And so this might be something that people might think, well, why do we need to do this? We really need to take the approach to develop and expand this capacity within our department. And the major goal is to improve the quality of education for children in grades pre-K through 12 through analysis of the effectiveness of programs with a cost-benefit lens. We have many, many programs that have been brought into the district and that we use. And we really need to make sure that we are able to ascertain the value added to ensure that it is doing what it's intended to do, or if do we need to cease using that particular program. We additionally need to focus on, as the parent spoke about, that we have to expand summer school to address learning loss. So this is approximately $4 million. And so we want to make sure that not only we expand the time, but also the scope of summer school to meet the needs of our scholars, excuse me, who have experienced learning loss. We talked about the multi-tiered support systems initiative. Professional development is really critical, and this is a need not only in Rochester, but in the Big Five. And we want to continue the work of updating K-12 materials that support CIA or curriculum instruction and assessment. We want to make sure that planning materials are aligned to next generation standards, and just continue to provide the needed professional development that our teachers and other staff need. As far as the financial plan, what's the priority? Our current financial management software does not serve the needs of the district in the areas of finance, of human resources, or budget development. When we test for accuracy, the reports have been found to contain erroneous information, and we can't have that. The age of the program requires the services of third-party vendors, which cost additional money. The outdated functionality of the program requires the development of programs on top of the program, also known as patches, and that's provided by Glenn's team to accommodate the needs that we have in the district. So that is a definite need. We talked about Medicaid to make sure that we maximize the reimbursements that come back to the district. And lastly, it is imperative that we improve our IEP processes. And doing so, our reimbursements will be improved upon. And IEP is Individualized Education Plan. So the big issue, or the big challenge for the Rochester City School District certainly is the fact that we have declining enrollment. And you've heard myself mention this. Dr. Jallo, our independent monitor, has mentioned this. Carlene, our CFO, and others have mentioned this. What I need to be very clear about is that whereas enrollment is dropping and declining in Rochester, this is a nationwide issue. For example, in Chicago Public Schools, enrollment dropped by over 15,000 students during this school year, and more than 20,000 students in the District of Columbia. The trend for declining enrollment really is particularly acute among pre-K and kindergarten students. And we know that that is attributed to the fact that some parents are just trying to balance work and family demands, Zoom schedules, organizing learning materials, and trying to make sure that everything happens at home online. And so some families have just do not want to be bothered with that particular area. So declining enrollment is an issue not only in Rochester, but across the United States. So if you look at our K-12 enrollment in Rochester City School District, you can see that it is declining. If you look at the 2015-16 school year, and if you'll go to that next slide, please, we started at 27,611, and you can see what is projected for the 21-22 school year. So it is declining, and we need to make the appropriate adjustments. Let's talk about the declining enrollment specific to Rochester. We know that over 1,000 students are pre-K students and 500 are kindergarten students. And I just have to note that at the beginning of this school year or the end of the summer, we actually reduced 10 kindergarten sections to accommodate for the fact that we were down. And then the remaining students span across grade levels across the district. And so I just want to delve into that just a little bit more. So let's talk about the process in Rochester. Each year, schools and programs receive an enrollment projection. And then this, you can go to the next slide. The enrollment projection is based on point-in-time enrollment captures. And we do this often during Beds Day. And then the projected enrollment is determined by utilizing a 3-year average grade progression rate, or AGPR. If you look at our staffing, our teaching staffing, you can see compared to our peer districts that we are overstaffed in the Rochester City School District. So the gold line is really the target, and anything underneath that represents that we are overstaffed. So for Rochester City School District, this shows that we have a ratio of about 10 students for every 1 teacher. And part of this challenge, frankly, has to do with the physical layout and the footprint of the schools in our district. So this next slide is a little difficult to read. I just want to show you all of our elementary schools, and then I will break it down by zones. But you can see this slide shows the projected K-6 enrollment at each school, followed by the enrollment the schools are staffed for if each section was maximized at 100%. And just of particular note, all self-contained sections are maxed according to their ratio, so 614 or 1211 special education classrooms. And all K3 sections are maxed to the 25 student to teacher RTA contractual obligation, and then grades 4 through 6 are 26 per the RTA contract. So let's just take a look at by zone what we're talking about, and you can see the differences. So you can see in the Northeast zone that the numbers of students that we are overstaffed by range from 59 at Roberto Clemente to 180 at School 33. Let's go to the Northwest zone, and you can see the differences there. So we can't go over the contractual guidelines, so we are overstaffed. There is at each one of those schools. Take a look at the South Zone schools, and you can see the distribution for School 2, 4, 12, 16, 19, 23, 29, and 35. And then take a look at our citywide schools. So based on our current enrollment projections, there are 2,714 open seats across the entire district, K-6. The issue is that we cannot currently consolidate any of these sections, as there are schools where there are 2 homeroom sections. So for example, at a school where there's 5th grade, there are a total of 35 students. There are 19 in one section and then 16 in another. In order to reduce to one section, 9 students would have to transfer to another school. How would we choose who goes? So this leaves 17 open seats in that grade level for next year. So let's talk about steps to help mitigate this issue. So certainly our data and our independent monitor academic plan states that we do need to reduce the footprint to accommodate fewer students. So we need to ensure that we are developing staffing levels that certainly align with the enrollment. We need to follow and adhere to contractual formulas, but we will also continue to analyze staffing needs for 21-22 school year. We do need to do some community engagement over the summer and fall. We need to work with principals, we need to work with teachers and other staff. We certainly need to work with families, and we need to work with the community. We need to, after having those conversations and soliciting input, we need to present information to the board with proposed next steps for right sizing and the footprint reduction by beds day for the 22-23 school year. The other thing that we do need to be mindful of, again, as we are bringing more students back to the Rochester City School District, that we want to be mindful of the distancing, whether it's the 6 feet or the 3 feet, that at least at the elementary level, that the CDC, Center for Disease Control, is suggesting, but we want to make sure that we have some comfortable space continuing through next year and making some assumptions that in 22-23 that things will be safer and that we'll not have to have the distances that are currently in place. So that's just the overview again of the process of certainly our priorities, of our places of emphasis for not only the independent monitors, academic and fiscal plan, but also the strategic plan. We talked about how we've worked to attain a balanced budget, how we've worked to shift the financial culture, and how we will short-term and longer-term really work to address the declining enrollment challenge that we have in the Rochester City School District. So with that, I will turn the remainder of the presentation over to Carleen Pierce, our Chief Financial Officer, to get into some specifics relative to the budget. Thank you.
Hey, good evening, everyone. Kelly, if you could go to the next slide, that would be great. Okay, so just to get started this evening, I know all of you are very well aware of this slide and very familiar with it. And again, I wanted to start us out in a place of where we were and where we are going as we move along this budget cycle. So again, taking a look at our structural deficit, you're going to see it that point in time in which our expenditures started to exceed our revenues. And that is the definition of a structural deficit, when expenditures exceed the revenues. And at the very same time, you're also going to see on the bottom of that chart where our fund balance started to deteriorate pretty much down to nothing. And so if we can go to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. We're taking a look again of where we were. And so as we look at the percentage of our fund balance as a percentage of revenue for 2019, you'll see how Rochester matched up against its peers. So it's accurate to say that if Rochester was not on this chart, obviously the average percentage as a percentage of revenue would be much greater because Rochester's fund balance is so low. So again, I just wanted to point that out to you because again, it's reminding us of where we have been. And again, now we're going to move forward into where we're going. So Callie, if you go forward one more slide, I'd appreciate it. As Dr. Nelms mentioned in his presentation, once COVID hit us, you can see that absolute sharp decline in expenditure. So the blue line representing expenditures and the green line representing revenues. And then you'll also see what resulted with regard to fund balance. So it was a positive upward swing in fund balance when the expenditures started to decline. Move to the next slide. And again, just to show this in a little bit different format, a little larger view here as far as the types of numbers that we're dealing with. But it's important to note that we cannot say that our structural deficit has been overcome. It would be a false representation to say that at this point in time we have overcome our structural deficit because again, COVID impact is providing a false positive. Next slide. Next slide, please. Thank you. Back in February, we presented this slide to you with regard to our observations on the executive budget. And since that time, really nothing has changed other than the fact that we have now been made aware of the Biden America Rescue Plan bill. And one thing that we know for sure from the time the executive budget is actually presented to us in January until the time the state budget is actually approved closer to April, we know it's going to change. And with that change, there's going to be many variables that we'll have to take into consideration. And so if we move on to the next slide, what we'd like to take a look there. Okay, so now where we are is actually looking at the revenue summary for all the funds, and you're looking at a sum total of approximately $980 million. And you're looking at the composition of the revenues. Again, all of this information, commissioners, can be found in section 3 of your budget book, and it'll be spelled out in greater detail for you there. What I'd like to point out is that when we're saying all funds, that means that we are looking at the general fund, the school lunch fund, and the special aid fund. If we can go to the next slide, I'd appreciate it. This one, this particular slide, we're going to spend a little bit more time on, and it's important to do so because so much has changed since we started this journey together, discussing our budget for this year. So as you go across the top of this particular chart, you're going to see where we have the general fund actual for 1920, the general fund 2021 as it was adopted and approved by the board. You're then going to see the column that says the proposed budget for 21-22. So that's where we are right now. And then of course the changes are on the far right side, but both in a monetary standpoint and a percentage of change as well. And so the reason we need to spend some time on this slide is that much already has changed. As you know, we had to present a balanced budget to the state monitor and to SED on March 1st, and we did so. But unfortunately, in the presentation of that budget, we needed to use pretty much all of the $87 million of that one-time stimulus, the COVID-19 stimulus supplemental money. We knew that that was not good enough. It was us realizing that, as well as SED realizing that we needed to go back and we needed to do more. We needed to reduce that reliance upon that funding, and we did so. On March 17th, we took another balanced budget back into SED and shared that with them. At that point in time, because of the reductions that we had made in scrubbing the budget, we were able to reduce reliance on the COVID-19 stimulus money down to $71 million, and that's where we had presented it. But still, when we came back, we knew we needed to do more. We needed to look harder, and we needed to take a look at all of the variables in front of us and figure out how we were going to put this puzzle together. And we did so. So this evening, I am reporting to you that as things stand right now, as it relies upon the executive budget, as we know it to be right now, and again, it's the executive budget, it's not the approved state budget, we actually will be reducing our reliance on the COVID-19 stimulus supplemental money down to $47.6 million. And the way that we're going to be able to do that is that we have only expended $5.8 million of the CARES money from the budget year 2021. By only expending that amount of money, because CARES Act was a 2-year revenue source, we are able to bring forward the remaining balance from the CARES money into the school year 21-22. As such, that will bring just over $23 million into 21-22 from that funding source. So when we are adding the CARES Act to a reduced level of the COVID stimulus, that is now how we're coming up with that $71 million. So again, it's important to state those facts, not to confuse people. But again, for those of you who have been with us for that entire journey of March 1st until where we are today, it's important to differentiate the funding sources and to break it down to that level. If we could go on to the next slide. Oh, I'm sorry, colleague, could you go back, please? One more thing I wanted to mention here. As you'll see, the proposed budget then for 21-22 for the general fund is $841 million, an increase of 7.7% over the prior year adopted budget. Thank you. We can go forward now. So again, we've looked at the revenue side, and now we need to take a look at the expenditure side and how are the expenditures divvied out, if you will, what portion is represented by each of the major areas. And again, this is all funds. So again, we're looking at the general fund, the special aid fund, and the school lunch fund. And we can go forward to the next slide, please. So when we're taking a look again, just at the general fund, again, our operating fund, so to speak, what you're going to see there too would be the major components. And one of the major components, as Dr. Myers-Small had stated, is going to be transportation expenditure. And you can see how that has risen over the course of the last 3 years, where we are now at $79 million of the expenditure budget. As she stated too in her presentation, the other factors that we have to carefully look at, monitor, and track would be the charter schools, which is running closer to 100 million at this point in time, and BOCES expenditures, which are running closer to just shy of 30 million. So this is the composition as we know it today. We will be going through these sections with you as we enter into deliberations, and I'm happy to take the questions. We will move on to the next slide, and in that particular slide, we're going to be speaking of the reductions. So from the adopted budget in 2021 to now the proposed budget of 21-22, we will have a reduction in 36.11 FTEs. On the very last slide this evening that I have, we will see the overall budget by fund. So each of the budgets now in the proposed in the center there in 21-22, you're going to have the totals for each of the budgets that I have mentioned previously, each of the funds I have mentioned previously, again, bringing us to that bottom line figure of $980 million. And I will turn it back over to Dr. Myers-Small.
Thank you, Carlene. So just in summary, this is our proposed draft of a balanced budget for the 21-22 school year. And really, this budget is an affirmation of the values set forth in our strategic plan, as well as in the independent monitors, academic and fiscal plans. It really lays the foundation for a shift from constantly focusing on our fiscal stability or our fiscal woes of the district to the prioritization that we really are giving to academics as well as student performance. And so we are present this draft budget to the Board of Education. I do want to note that as we continue to move forward, we will continue to look at those class sizes. And so we don't have major layoffs this year, but we will continue to look at what the implications might be for 22-23 and beyond. But we thank you for listening, and this is our presentation for the evening.
Thank you. And I hope that we're going to get an email copy of the presentation as well. I know that the budget books were delivered, but I personally want to see the slides, and I'll be reading line by line, just so you know, Dr. Myers-Small. And looking at last year's line by line highlights.
I wouldn't expect anything less, Commissioner LeBron.
So I know we'll be on that journey starting this weekend. I know we have some time, but with that, I'm going to conclude this portion of the meeting and turn it over to Commissioner Clark. Thank you.
Thank you, Commissioner LeBron. At this point in time, I'll convene the Audit Committee of the whole meeting. And I'll start by asking for a motion to accept the minutes from our December 8th, 2020 Audit Committee meeting.
Motion.
Can I get a second?
Second.
All in favor? Aye.
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 Great, then the minutes are approved. But as you will recall, at our meeting of December 8th, we were presented with the 2020 Comprehensive Annual Financial Report, but we did not include the single audit results. And the reason for that was due to a delay in the uniform guidance for single audits, for uniform, yes, for the audit. So at this point in time, I'm going to invite Catherine Barrett from Freed Maxit to provide the results of the single audit. And the final reports will be forthcoming, but she will provide an overview of relevant details from the audit. Hopefully, Catherine is with us.
She's just joining now, Commissioner Clark.
Okay, thank you.
Mhm.
I am here.
Great. Hello. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Can everybody hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. So Anissa, does everybody have the presentation?
It is actually on Board Docs now. I just had gotten that. Do you see that, Kalia?
Let me pull it up now.
Thank you. I sent you a text. I'm sorry. Catherine was ready to meet live tonight. So actually it was a little shift in, we were prepared to hand out. She was all ready to hand out things and it was like, oh, we're not meeting live? And I'm like, no, we're not doing that yet. So sorry for that last minute switch.
That's all right. Someday we'll be back at live and in person,
That'll be for next year's audit.
which we're already planning. While you get that up on the screen, I am here to give you an update on the single audit portion of it. So usually we do the single audit concurrently with the financial audit. And what the single audit is that any entity that receives more than $750,000 in federal funding has to have a single audit in accordance with basically the uniform guidance. There's a big law for it, but it's called the uniform guidance. And it's produced by the federal government. And the compliance audit verify that the entity is complying with all the requirements of the specific grant. Now you receive a number of grants. The compliance audit, there's a compliance supplement that's issued every year and it's updated for new changes in grants from the granting agency. And generally that compliance supplement is issued in June. This year it was issued in August. And even when they read it in August, they said this does not contain any new compliance requirements associated with COVID-19. So we saw that and said, well, wait a second, we've got districts that have, CARES Act money, which you do in your child nutrition program. We have to wait for this addendum to be released before we can even start your audit to know what compliance changes they were going to make and require us to test. So that was going to be issued in September and October, and it was issued at the end of December. So that's why we're here today rather than talking about this in December, talk about your regular audit. So if you want to flip to the third page, page 2. A couple more. This year you received a little over 70, well, you expended $72.8 million in the fiscal year 2020. About 3.8% higher, back one, that 3.8% more than what you spent in the previous year, just to give you an idea of how much you spend federal grant funding. Most of your funding comes through the Department of Education. Some is dispersed through the Department of Agriculture. That's your child nutrition program. And then you have a little bit that you get through the Department of Human Services. And most all of your grants are passed through New York State. So they're considered pass-through grants. Next slide. So you were considered what we can say is a low-risk auditee for 2020. You have low risk and high risk. So if you had findings in your compliance audit in 2019 or 2018, you were considered a high risk auditee, but we had no findings in those years. So you were a low risk auditee, which means that we have to select for testing 4% of your federal program expenditures. And we rotate through the different programs, usually trading on your largest program. This year we tested your special education cluster grant, the IDEA grant, as well as the child nutrition grant. Next slide. So this year we had no findings within the child nutrition grant, which is what kind of held up all of the testing because we didn't know what the compliance supplement set was going to tell us what our requirements were for testing. In the special education program, however, we did find an instance of non-compliance, and that was in the maintenance of effort requirement under the grant. So this is basically saying that if you take your federal funding and your local funding that you spend on special education, that you did not, what they call maintain effort, or you did not spend at least as much in 2020 as you did in 2019. And that's, purely because of the shutdown. Unfortunately, the U.S. Department of Education provided waivers to anybody, any state that would allow you to kind of, they waived the requirement. So there were no waivers that were permitted in this environment, the pandemic, where everything was closed in 2020. So it's no wonder that you didn't pass this test. You just did not have to expend the resources because there was no children in school. So this is an instance of non-compliance. However, we do not consider it, given the circumstances, to be a weakness or a significant deficiency, because basically it was out of your control. If you had a find that was within your control, you didn't do something that caused a deficiency or a non-compliance, it'd be a different story. But you had no way to comply with this given the closure of the school for half months of the year. So we don't consider it a material weakness or a significant deficiency. So the good news is that the district will continue to be a low-risk auditee for the 2021 fiscal year. So it won't require any additional testing on our part, for this fiscal year. And I know that Anissa has been working to kind of resolve the issue and really nail down how much you're out of compliance with the maintenance of effort. The maintenance of effort is actually a form that has filed with the state. And I believe the filing deadline for the maintenance of effort is the end of this month. So there are certain exceptions that you can work within the calculation. And this has been with representatives from the state to try and see, what exceptions apply to really find out how much out of compliance with on the maintenance of effort.
So to speak to that a little bit, we started out with a non-compliance amount in the neighborhood of $6.9 million. And the real concern or the real effort we want to deal with this non-compliance is that we potentially then would have to have a reduction in our grant funding in the subsequent year to make up for the non-compliance amount. For that reason, it was definitely worthwhile time and effort to try to comb through our expenditures and do some data mining to figure out what non-compliance To date, I've been able to identify $5.4 million in exceptions that we're able to do. At this point, our liability sits at 1.5. I have not yet quit. I anticipate, and I'm working hard because I really want to get us to the point where where we are in compliance and there is no repayment amount. So, while it wasn't the planned audit work in particular, obviously it's time well spent to try to reduce that liability down to nothing. And I think there were two big factors you have to consider in addition to the pandemic closing in March was one of the factors. And another difficulty we've encountered is that we had spent so much more in 2019-20, in 18-19, we had increased spending by $20 million. So when you start combining those two issues together, it really made it difficult to make maintenance of effort. So for that reason, we are just working through it. And we're trying to see how close we can get. We found in 19-20, we expended $57.3 million, whereas in the prior year, we had spent 64.2. So we are actively working on that, knowing that the deadline is next week. Normally, this will be something the budget team will be working on, but with timing and the way everything's falling out, they're in the midst of this budget process. So I am actively working on it. I did connect with Terry, so we are at least communicating on this matter, and ultimately we'll be able to both file on time and hopefully I can close this $1.5 million gap. Back to Kathy. I know we're waiting on the final report from Kathy. She's waiting out to see where we end up with this so that her final report will be issued with whatever the difference is going to be. And that will actually be the last part of that.
That's right. So we're, as soon as we get the updated information from Anissa, we should be in a good spot to issue the final report. And at that point, the district needs to go and complete what they call the data collection form, which is the reporting on the federal government's website of all the grant funding. And that is, it has been extended until 30th. The filing of the data collection form. Questions or concerns?
Yeah, so I was just getting ready to ask, are there any questions? I'm looking at my screen.
Me, but I'm having, there we go. Sorry. I was going to raise my hand, but I have some technical difficulties, so I had to reboot some stuff. Yeah, I just had a question around child nutrition and what exactly was audited and reviewed under that scope. Like, did you review contracts, purchasing?
Yeah, so there's a number of different requirements within that program. Because you have a school-wide program, it's a little bit different. But you still have to make sure that you're counting the students, that the students are accurate, that you're receiving the income information that qualifies you as having a wide program. We have to make sure we look at menus, making sure that all the meal requirements are tested. That gives you an idea of some of the requirements that we test under the child nutrition program.
Kathy, do you have a list of those things and then the findings for each of those individually, or the summation is just that everything was fine there?
I don't have a list per se. I could probably get something from my team, as far as what the requirements are, but we had no findings in that area.
Yeah, I would be interested.
That's something that you're interested in. I can forward it to you.
Thank you. It is. I would be interested in seeing what was reviewed, knowing and that there was only a sample of the entire program that was audited is what it sounded like, 40%.
Well, that's 40% of your total expenditures. So we pick programs that make up 4% of that $72 million.
Okay.
So this year, 40%, by picking those two programs, we covered our testing threshold.
Okay, thank you. Yes, I would like to see a copy at least of the forms and things that were audited specifically under the child nutrition.
Okay.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Not seeing any. I did have one question before you left. You indicated that due to the maintenance of effort in special education, that we're still considered low risk, but you indicated that the feds did not issue any waivers. So is that a local decision to determine whether we're low risk or high risk?
Somewhat, because this is not considered a control deficiency, and what that means is that you didn't have any failures of your internal controls to gather the data, submit data, do calculations of the data. It's merely a non-compliance of a requirement. So because it's only non-compliance and not a deficiency in your internal controls, because everything was working, just
Yes.
the numbers work out. That's why we will still consider you a low risk auditee.
Okay, great. Thank you. Are there any other questions? I'm looking at the list and I don't see any hands. So with that, Catherine, I will thank you for attending the meeting tonight and thank you for doing the overview of the report.
My pleasure.
All right.
Have a good evening.
All right, thank you.
And Anissa, I guess my question to you, have we received the written report yet? Or are we still waiting on the final written report?
So Catherine is waiting to see where we end up with the exceptions to determine, as of right now, her testing has resulted in us having non-compliance. And so she's allowing us the opportunity to see what else I can find as far as exceptions are concerned. Because if I can get the other 1.5 million combing through vacancies and different people who might have left and other possibilities within the data that exists between 2019-20 and 2018-19, she will be able to write a report without a non-compliance item in there. So I'm really working hard to try to get that opinion clean.
Great. And once we receive that report, that'll finalize the June 2020 audit. All right, great. Thank you. With that, I'll turn it over to you and for an update.
Okay, thank you. So we're moving along. I have out there and I sent to you a copy of a fixed asset review that was performed. Generally speaking, it was more operational controls and recommendations that were there. There were certainly some controls in place. We were looking for improved procedures or more documentation and clarification. There was significant turnover that occurred within the fixed assets area over the last year or so. So that really made it difficult. So we really do see the need for more clear documentation because that fully supports turnover and whatever needs to happen within that shop. We really think those enhancements will improve the existence of fixed assets, the inventory and the valuation that exists. So we are looking for that. We also are asking and recommending that the Board of Education consider adopting a fixed asset policy. I did notice even Buffalo does have a fixed asset policy, and I certainly could share that if that's something you're interested in. We want to make sure that the district Board of Education does at least evaluate what their expectations as it relates to fixed assets are, whether that be, while management may decide upon how capitalization is taking place, a full understanding and at a board level of things such as inventories, asset tagging, some of these higher properties that happen in fixed assets. So we did want that considered at the board level. In addition, we want to make sure all procedures are complete, accurate, and current. There were some dated procedures that really do need to get updated. I think the biggest observation within fixed asset, there isn't an actual physical inventory that takes place. And we really want to see that performed on a periodic basis. Obviously, that's best practice. We also want to see that potential asset tagging or determine some appropriate methodology for the district for asset tagging. We recognize that everything may not be tagged, but we really want to make sure that a thoughtful process is established at the district level to determine how we want to go about doing that. Having procedures to make sure that we already have a validation process where the fixed asset manager would send to the various asset custodians a listing to verify when it's time for the financial statements. So that process does occur. It doesn't consistently occur annually. And an improvement to that process that we're looking for is on a sample basis or periodic, we really do want the custodians to identify all assets that are present. Because in this case, if we send a list and we're missing something on the list and all they're doing is verifying our incomplete list, we then don't have visibility to assets that may exist. So we're really looking for an improvement of that control. The other or last major control that we want to see improved is working through our obsolete and surplus inventory. We have an auction process when items are either obsolete, or if they're surplus items, we actually put them up and have an automated inventory process that we take place. And we want to make sure that there is a better process to ensure accounting is in the loop, that accounting is periodically reaching out to asset custodians and having the conversation, okay, tell me about your assets that you have this year. Is there something that you plan on disposing of? You know, what are your plans? And this would put them in a better position to make sure that our asset records are more accurate and they're in the loop as to significant acquisitions or disposals that happen at the district, and ensuring those things do happen timely. A last minor operating control would be just to validate and ensure accurate data entry into our asset management system. And there is an interesting thing as it relates to our PeopleSoft system. We certainly do have asset reporting in the system, but our projects are not recorded in PeopleSoft. They are off book in an Excel spreadsheet. And we're really looking, as we try to do some of the grouping, possibly because of limitations in the system, we want to make sure as we look at the conversion to the new system, we want to have that section within the system so it's fully integrated. So that at a high level, management was great. There's still turnover going on in fixed assets. So they're really bringing on new staff members. So that caused some of the dates to get pushed back a little bit because they're waiting to complete a new hire in order to fulfill and complete all of these various items in the shop. It made sense to get the new staff member in so they can work with management. So it'll be a collaborative process. So that would conclude the fixed asset review.
Also, reviewing the report, I noticed that the various deadlines date from July of 21 to July of 22, and there seems to be mutual agreement that this needs to be in place. So with that, I'm assuming that we need a motion to approve this report?
Yes.
Well,
I have some questions though. I'm sorry, Mr. Clerk.
I just blew right by you.
And that's okay. I'll try to raise my hand very quickly.
Okay.
So I do just have some questions around the dates. I did see that they said that they were going to hire someone to work on some of these things, but just a small pet peeve of mine, and the board has certainly been guilty of this in the past as well with Dr. Aquino's report, is throwing dates out there, right? That kind of look good on paper, but I need them to make sense, and to, especially when we have a strategic plan, a fiscal plan, and the academic plan. But we also, with policy, have like this grid and this matrix that we're following, right? And so there are three things all that are going to be due September 2021, which were pretty big, and is this year's during the pandemic. The person hasn't been hired yet, so I just want to understand the feasibility of that happening around that deadline. Two, there are two things listed, one including the policy, and just one thing to understand, it says December 2021, if that actually aligns with how we have created the structure for how we're gonna go through the policy reviews. And then there's one for July 2021, one for July 2022, but the one for July 2021 kind of ties into some of the September ones. It's kind of out of order for me. So I just want to understand just those responses. And then there was two things in January, I'm going to take this back. 3 things in the year 2022. So one in January 22, one in July 2022, actually 2 in January 22, and 1 in July 2022. I just need to understand like how the dates were created and the feasibility of those things being met during those dates.
So when this process took place, and the director of accounting, Carrie Couples, we actually talked through each of these particular ones. If in her case, some of the procedures were written, but there were some areas where there might have been some areas that required additional time, whereas other areas would be update to policies. So when she went through and identified what some of the dates and certain things that would need to happen, she actually considered, I think there's a person that she is very close to hiring, and she wanted to get the person on board and went through and in each of these cases identified, well, the person could do these things in this period of time, but they're going to need more time for this. So it was a full out conversation as she worked through the various dates that she thought made sense based on things that are currently in place and things that she would need to do versus good time spent for the new hire. I think there was one thing that included like the July date when it involved inventory type things. She felt that that was a good idea for a new person to learn, understand the assets, get out in the field and that type of thing. Yes, it's COVID, but it should be social distance. It's not like, you're going to have assets that it shouldn't be crowded. She would be able to go if they say a person is, facility visiting. So she actually did spend time and had quite a bit of discussion on the items that would take her more time or less time based upon where she currently stands. But she identified those dates as well as CFO Pierce. They reviewed them and felt that they made sense for the director of accounting and her team. So she thought they were sensible.
Was there alignment done to things that already exist? Like we've given ourselves a plan with some deadlines and things that we have to meet. So I just going back to just the policy, one, I would support a policy on it, right? But then I also know that we've created a plan to go through all of the policies. So was that aligned?
So I don't know about that part. I know I did not look at your time frame for policy. I was more focused when we sat and we talked about what needed to be done and what work would have to be understood from an operating protocols and procedures perspective to be able to turn it over to the policy and go through that particular process. So it was independent of the board's policy process. Her intent was to provide the input and the content needed for the board to be able to consider the policy.
Yeah, so I'm going to end with this, Anissa, because I think this is my ask to all staff as we get these things, that there is some alignment, because what's happened in the past is that we all work in these silos. Mm-hmm. And we're really trying to focus on really aligning all the plans so we're all on the same page, all walking in the same direction at the same time. And when we have things like we do an audit and then there are different dates that may not align to other dates that we're trying to work through and memorize, then what ends up happening, at least for myself, it feels like this random thing that's just out here on its own because it wasn't properly aligned from the beginning. And I would just like us to figure out a way to align these conversations so that they're tied into all of the plans that we have already approved and the state has approved and we're working through, so that it fits. It fits and it doesn't get lost in the shuffle of all these other plans that are always going to be constantly brought up and talked about because this is where we're focused, and things like this end up falling through the cracks. And then 3 years from now, we have another audit and this hasn't been done and we're just like, oh, we forgot about this. So that's just my ask to yourself, but also to all the staff that you mentioned that helped get these dates aligned. Thank you.
Mm-hmm. So yes, again, so I just want to mention, so I don't make the dates. Usually operating management understands what they have on their plate, what changes or what transitions are occurring in their organization and where they stand. And they actually usually come up with the dates that they believe are feasible for them. So I didn't do it too. It was more suggested by the individual, but I do appreciate your point, especially as it relates to policy and making sure that there is alignment and coordination. Thank you, Commissioner LeBron.
Thank you. Commissioner Powell has a question.
It's more a comment. The dates that Commissioner LeBron read out were generally July dates. That's totally consistent with the Policy Committee work plan, which puts the financial policies into the queue immediately after we finish our special ed policies, which were targeted to complete in July. So it's totally consistent with everything that the Policy Committee's agenda is totally consistent with everything that Commissioner LeBron just said.
Thank you, Commissioner Powell. With that said, we'll move on to the next the Labor Relations report.
Excuse me, was that accepted or I was
Oh,
just,
that's right. Yeah, no, it was not. Thank you. The motion was on the floor to accept the fixed asset review report. Can I get a motion and a second?
A motion.
Second.
All in favor, usual sign? Aye.
Aye.
Great, thank you. And thank you all. Thank you also, Anissa. So we'll move on to the next report now.
okay. I know that in the interest of time, we were running a little behind, but I still want to respect your time. So I'm going to move through this at a good pace. But I just want to touch bases on the labor relations MOA, MOU review. Really, the scope of work we were trying to do is really conduct a review of labor relations memorandums of agreement and memorandums of understanding, along with some labor relations controls. Specifically, the ask under the state monitor's academic plan was to look at the last 5 years from 2015 to present at these various agreements, just to understand the awareness and the financial obligations. In addition, the Board of Education did approve the review of union/labor relations in the audit in my work plan in this past year too. So it was perfect alignment for this work to be taking place, which was wonderful. I think there was a lack of clarity as it relates to the last update. The written update did identify that we were not on target, but this work actually did take place on time. It started on time, and we do expect to be finished on time. So we did work with, and I did have a conversation with Dr. Jallo. So I believe that was corrected, but I did want to make sure I put that on the record because I know it was the first thing that Commissioner Clark asked me about as far as, am I not going to be on time? And indeed, I will be completed, and that work did start in a timely manner. As it relates, so the scope of work did take place with both directing and requiring this work to be done. I know that Dr. Jallo has requested that the feedback of this review take place and occur with the negotiations team so that there be some awareness of the various things that we're seeing as it related to this work. The approach for the review is we obtained the MOAs and MOUs that were from the General Counsel's office in November 2020. We actually wanted to add a separate step. So I reached out to the various union leaders and requested copies of all of their MOAs and MOUs just to compare to our records, because for an effort of completeness, if we received a list with one number from General Counsel's office and say the union's interpretation was something completely different, I wanted to make sure I can reconcile between the two. So I do appreciate full cooperation that I did receive from Martha Keating from RTA, Dan DiClemente, Angela Rivera, as well as John Rowe from ASARC. So they were very agreeable, and I did appreciate that. We actually also tried to select one of the bargaining agreements just to try to get an understanding of, when you look cover to cover to a bargaining agreement, do we really know how much money is in a bargaining agreement? When you read a paragraph and it says someone will be paid something for a particular reason, what does that mean? An example of that is if you were looking, and I might want to add this little caveat, while we're reviewing the information, we're doing a review and an audit of data. We are not expressing an opinion on this data or the agreements that were made. I just want to put that out there. So it's not to that extent, but I'm just identifying what it is that I am seeing so that it can be used as a data point or information. So I don't want anyone to think that they can be picked on as it relates to this work that I've done. But when you look at the CBAs, it was interesting because just to grab like the RTA CBA, if you look in it, you'll see in the back, there's a whole schedule of stipends and things that the various individuals get at SOTA for musicals or, their shows, which are fabulous. And I'm sure they take lots of time. But when I looked at it, I thought, wow, there's no number on this page. It just talks about if you have this job, you get $4,000. If you have this job, you get a certain amount of money. I don't dispute that. But when I took the paper, and maybe it's the auditor in me, I decided I would start adding up all of the different salaries or the different stipends people would get. And the one page was like over $77,000. And I thought, gee, where do we record this number? And so that's the type of thing we were really trying to look at and get an appreciation or an understanding of what's in the agreement. What's in there is there, but from a budgetary and financial standpoint, do we know and understand to ensure that we're properly budgeting for these things so that we can move forward, so that as we make agreements or as we decide different things for the various bargaining units, we need to make sure we know the associated costs, because that needs to go into what the discussion is. And so when we finished our review, we did end up with 211 agreements. We also noticed that there were differences in interpretation and opinion as it related to something that maybe one of the unions felt was an agreement, whereas maybe our internal group did not feel it was really an agreement. But it really brings the point, while we call them MOUs and MOAs, sometimes they're just negotiated terms or litigation or settlements. There's various ways you can describe something that happens outside of the CBA that could have a financial component to it. So we really need to be mindful of the fact that it's not the term. I think the intent is really what's the substance of what has been agreed to, and if it costs us something, where are we tracking that? So I just wanted to put that particular point out there. We also recognized a few operating improvements that we thought could happen. We did notice that the labor relations team, and I do want to recognize how helpful Megan Abbott was as it related to this process. You know, they have a list, or what they called an index, and they tried to identify what the various agreements were, but we really don't have a centralized repository or something readily available to access that identifies every agreement, what's the topic, how many people are impacted, how much does it cost, for how long. And so one of the things we noticed is, what are the attributes of an executed memorandum of agreement or understanding? And when I say the attributes, what level of detail is necessary? Should I be able to read the document and truly understand what was agreed to and what has to be implemented? We didn't see that consistently when we read them. Who has to approve it? What gives rise to the board actually needing to see the agreement? Is there some point in time where the board feels that it's necessary? Who does the financial analysis? How are we sure it's the correct number? Is it consistently performed? So there were things such as that. Reporting, is there periodic reporting of these various agreements that happen? So those were some thoughts and attributes. Another interesting point was there were agreements that were there with no sunset date. So it's great if you're going to give me $100 a year. Is that for the rest of my life? And so it really raises a question of, so when is the stop? And so we have a different number of things where if we fix or we tie down a little bit our agreements, I'm not trying to tie the hands of what is bargaining in good faith, but I am hoping to identify or put greater clarity on what these relationships are and what it is that we're agreeing to, so that works much better. We really want to make sure that we stop and think about what level of board visibility is necessary, both of visibility, what level of approval, or when does the board want to approve, and what type of reporting does the board want to see as it relates to these agreements. That's something I think that would really help and bring some clarity to that as well. As we look and when we think about that repository or somewhere where these things are held, and I understand it's not for the world to see, but even for the selected individuals that are there, we start thinking about how many people are impacted by something. So when reading, say, a contract or an agreement, and it works for a class or a group of people with the same title, how many people are in that title when you made the agreement? Are there 50, 500, 5,000? Does it for future people who join that group? So it becomes really difficult to really understand what some of these things mean because it's not that specific. And I agree, the people who are negotiating must know and understand what they mean, or to some extent they may understand. But I would think if it's memorialized, I would think these documents need to exist beyond the individuals, because individuals leave, and then those left behind are trying to interpret things they clearly don't understand that are not clearly documented. So, you know, we looked at recurring themes and things such as that. And just as a drive-by as it relates to what some of those themes are, we think about retirement. So when we look inside, and like I said, I'm not picking on a union, but I'll just say one union just for fun. One union had 11 memorandums of agreement, and in that time frame, it was for retirements packages. It offered retirement incentives, paid leave, vacation time not earned, contractual bonus payment, or holding someone harmless if there was an error in their pay. To put all of that together and offer that for someone retiring, and we saw that totaling around $178,000. That's over the 5-year period, granted. But when you're looking at it, you're like, okay, that's fine if that's what is needed and that's what's desired. But what is the amount of visibility to this? Are these agreements, at what level do they come before the board, and are they acceptable? We saw a lot of additional pay opportunities where From a district perspective, it could have resulted in a potential cost savings, because if a supervisory position was had turnover, then people would receive additional pay in order to cover their job. So an existing employee might take anywhere from 5 to 25% of their current salary to cover additional duties in addition to their current job. Well, logically, it makes sense. But when you start looking at it, it became a little unclear or vague to us. When we totaled it in this one union, it was $96,000 worth of payments. But what does a 5% additional duty look like versus a 25% additional duty? And how exactly does that work? And, you know, how do we determine how much additional duties are included and what is the time frame? And so, you know, it's just looking at those types of things. We looked in another union and we saw things, stipends, grievance payments, and just general increases that might have taken place. And we don't question that there might have been a good reason for some of these things to take place. We were just trying to understand, is there enough detail that would allow it? One of the challenges of the review is the fact that we were really unable in some cases to truly quantify what was agreed to. And so that became really tough after combing through so many of these documents. We were like, well, we can look at it this way, but, you know, because if you don't have the number of people who are going to get what you stated, what is the true cost of it? And when does it end? So I could be sitting in a situation where I would agree to, making this up completely, pay anyone whose first name is Beatrice $1,000. I'm sure she'd like that. And I don't know how many people have that as a first name. So if I don't know how many people have that, I don't know how much that's going to cost me. And I don't say when I'm going to stop paying her. So I don't know if this is a $5,000 problem or a $50,000 or $500,000 problem. Now, I'm not talking about crazy money, but it is money. And so that became a little bit difficult to understand. And so when we were trying to just comb through and say, okay, how would the budget team even budget for some of these items? It became difficult if we couldn't figure out how big the population was and what the duration was. So in some cases, yeah, we can put an estimate together. In other cases, it was very difficult to do so because we need more information, which was not included in the MOA. We've seen some really positive changes that have happened and that are happening now. There is a committee. It seems like it's a committee meeting that's meeting on a weekly basis. I believe the responsibility, and Dr. Myers-Small can correct me if I'm wrong, has shifted from General Counsel's office over to the Human Resources or Human Capital Office, or the team is coming out of there. So now there's like team meetings and discussions, which is a great improvement that has happened since the beginning of the year, but at least it's allowing a little more cross-functionality in how things are done. That is also, you know, that's huge and that's very helpful. I will take a pause and call on Vice President Elliott. I see your hand.
Yeah, thank you. You know, I had mentioned in previous meetings that I didn't understand when Dr. Jallo associated MOUs with the collective bargaining units. I didn't get it, but now I understand it has to do with people getting additional pay. And I didn't realize that that was necessarily, that we didn't have the kind of oversight of that as we should. So I'm glad that the superintendent is looking at that, because we don't really know. I guess we could find out through HR, but how much money we're spending in those contracts, and really, are they, all of those are needed? As you all know, I always vote no on additional pay, you know, from a philosophical perspective. Mm-hmm. Now it adds credence to that, because, you know, we don't always know, seemingly, if those agreements are adding value to the educational achievement of our students. I don't think we have an understanding of that at this point. But I'm so excited that the state monitor has pointed that out to us, and we could begin to dwell into that, because, you know, with the budget deficit the way we have it, and while we may be getting more money into our coffers, you know, we have to make sure that we're doing our due diligence around those additional resources that we're getting. I promise the state legislatures who represent us that we have as a school district, if we're asking them to advocate for additional resources, that we have to be responsible for those resources that they provide for us. And as such, this is an area I believe that will lend as an example of us doing our due diligence of making sure that the money that we receive on all levels of government, that we're doing our due diligence to ensure that we're being effective and efficient with it. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Commissioner LeBron?
Yeah, I guess for me, I just wanted to one, I want to clarify for individuals who may be listening that these were past practices of previous superintendents. And I just feel like it's really important to lift that up because it's been an ongoing issue and who knows how long, when it started. Clearly, it's one of those things you walk into and you start asking questions as a new person. It's like, there's no logic to it, but it's like we've always done it and this is the way we operate, but there's no actual policy or procedures in writing. So it's hard to kind of shuffle through that type of like culture, if you will. But my question, I guess, to you, Anissa, as our auditor is like, what is your recommendation to this board on how do we have better oversight of these things? Is it policy driven? Do we need to create procedures and policies or policies that then have a regulation attached to it that we all agree to so that we also have better oversight when these things are happening? You know, one of the things that I will have been advocating for and will continue to advocate for is reducing the consultant fee of $35,000 before it comes to the board. I personally still believe that that threshold is too high. And just in an earlier meeting today, even around donations, right? If we accept a donation for $1,500 through our own board policy at a threshold we have set, there has to be a board resolution to accept money. But we allowed money to go out at a minimum of $35,000 before it comes to the board. And that just doesn't even make sense to me, right? That we're micromanaging the donations that are coming in, but we're not really having greater oversight around the consultations and consultants that we hire out. So for me, this would fall under perhaps even that policy to have something added there. But I'm interested in hearing what your recommendations are to this board to have better oversight of this.
Well, one of the recommendations that is actually coming out of this work is simply the board has to establish what is the threshold they're comfortable with for these types of agreements to go forward. And so the board would need to establish some magical number, whatever that might be, as well as or criteria or some sort of threshold for which you either want to know about it in advance or, you know, whatever the case is. When I look at, say, the RTA retirement stipend that went out where all of the people got the $10,000 for 5 years, because the number was $1.74 million, that deal came to the board and the board was aware of it. So I get it. That was so big, there was awareness. But when you're talking about some of these smaller ones and you're sending someone away with a package and it might cost you $40,000 or $50,000, is that important enough? Or whatever it is. So the board has to decide what their tolerance is. I can't decide that in particular for you, but you have to sit down. I know there is an HR committee that now exists as well. And it's really sitting there saying, at this level, I want to see it. If you think about it, you have the consultant and contractor type report that comes through and you have it accumulating and you're seeing things that happen after the fact. And so you probably need to establish what types of things you need to see in advance and what other things you want to be seeing reporting on that happens after the fact. And I want to be sensitive to, we're not trying to bring the district to a screeching halt on making anything happen. But at the same time, I think we're going to be coming up with some safe parameters that makes the board comfortable that they have visibility because you indeed approved the CBAs. So that was the holistic agreement that you've agreed that we should be complying with. And there's plenty in there. So if these additional agreements, these would be potentially amendments or adjustments to that. So that becomes, you know, a little bit interesting because then that modifies the terms which you've originally approved. So, you know, I really think it makes sense for the board to really spend time thinking about what's the tolerance level that's acceptable and then establishing this tolerance we want to see, this tolerance level we want to approve, and this is the type of reporting we expect to see on these types of things.
Thank you. And so with that said, I'm going to request Vice President Elliott if she would be willing to work with myself, because I feel like this would cross over both into finance and human resources, and we could potentially cross collaborate on reviewing what Anissa has, but then also meeting with the administration and talking with them and figuring out if we can like have a threshold to start off on.
Sounds good to me, Commissioner.
Thank you, Vice President Elliott.
Okay,
Great.
Dr. Myers Small,
Thank you, Vanessa.
have your hand up also.
Thank you. Yeah. Thank you, Commissioner Clark. What I was going to suggest is maybe just doing just an overall categorical, review of what are the different types of MOAs and MOUs, right? So you can get an understanding of what they entail, because they aren't just solely for, an increase in pay or a package, and then we can make a good informed decision about next steps and moving forward. But we can, prepare an overview of that or a summary of what that entails.
And I have that for you, so I can certainly provide that. All right, so moving along. So generally speaking, I know that the intent or the spirit was what types of things are needed or what information it needs to be known by the team that's going forward in negotiations so that they can think of things. The only other item that comes to mind is as we decide, and again, I'm not saying that things should or shouldn't happen. I'm not asking for a vote, but we're specifically looking at when we decide to implement something or when we agree to something, we really need to make sure it's something we can implement. And so we, effectively, systematically, and relatively quickly in the promised time frame. So we want to make sure both some of that will be addressed within our systems, and as we upgrade, potentially, we hope that certain things will be a little bit easier, but also thinking through how we implement different agreements and what types of things we agree to, make sure it's something that we can programmatically do versus a considerable amount of manual intervention, which causes a problem. Dr. Myers, is that a new hand or is that your old hand? That's old?
Old.
Okay.
Seasoned.
So I just wanted to make sure.
Seasoned.
Another question. So yeah, it's a situation of that, but we want to make sure that we can meet our commitments. And I know that sometimes that happens where we've committed to do something and then it's like, uh-oh, how are we going to implement this thing? And then that causes problems. We should be able to, in good faith, both commit to doing things and also be able to execute in a timely manner. So that also needs to be considered as well. So in spirit, I just wanted to make sure the board had an idea of the types of things that we saw as it related to that particular project. That was in the spirit of what was there, and I'm sure there will be a few recommendations as it relates to that. I would like to move on to just some other, another update, if that would be okay, if there are no more questions on that topic. We're a little bit over in time. Of course, we're running behind schedule, but I just want to make sure I inform you for I can't believe it's time again, June 30, 2021 audit is just around the corner in a few months. The preliminary fieldwork scheduled for June 3rd, the week of June 3rd, as well as our single audit. While we're quite late this year, we're planning it for September 13th to start then, and our year-end work will start on September 27th. We are planning for our next audit committee meeting, which is at the end of May. We will see the audit plan for the year-end fiscal audit. On that note, I also just wanted to inform the board that we received some information from that apparently didn't know, but the Government Finance Officers Association did send out a communication to state that the annual financial report, which is the comprehensive annual financial report, historically has been used, and we used to use an acronym for it. We found out that that is a profoundly offensive racial slur in South Africa. So we will no longer use the acronym for the comprehensive annual financial report. So I just want to make sure that there is familiarity, and I will be referring it to the annual report or the financial report. So we're just going to notice that little shift, but they were stating that it was offensive and they didn't know it was offensive. So the desire is to no longer use that acronym.
Kaffir Boy, right? The book, I remember the book, Kaffir Boy.
Okay, so there you go. So for that reason, it went out and I was like, wow. So when that did come out, I thought to myself, oh my goodness, we've been doing this. We've had no idea for many years. So it's going to be a shift. It's going to be a learning experience, but I did want to make sure the board was informed that that is a slight change that needs to happen for us as well. So we can be considerate of others and not offensive. The next point is not only will Nairaki Smith will be here to speak with the board next month, according to the quarterly schedule. I just wanted to try to get an understanding. We'll have an informal evaluation process, which was included and embedded within the RFP process. That'll be probably May, June timeframe. However, now is the time for us to be considering our satisfaction potentially, and whether we want to continue moving forward with this organization, because I need to put in the request to initiate a contract for next year if it's the board's desire to continue working with Nairaki Smith. So I did want to put that out as a question, or I wasn't sure how you wanted to proceed in that. I was hoping for a little feedback on that one because I was going to keep moving as as if everything is fine, but I just didn't know. Steve, did you join to say something, or did you just?
As I usually do.
Okay, go ahead.
I would suggest that if you want to discuss people's feelings on the performance of Nairaki through this year, we could take that into executive session.
Okay, great.
Does involve the performance of an corporation.
Okay, perfect. Well, we do need to be thinking about that because we need to move forward to get a contract for next year. We are completing our upcoming work. We have some projects that we've done in payroll, capital, and staffing that we wanted to be able to do. Obviously, my highest priority is getting through the IDEA work that needs to be done. We are required to have a student activity funds audit this year, which is a little bit interesting because schools open so late. There were a few activity funds that were allowed to commence. They were directly approved by the school chiefs. They were generally around like seniors or class type groups, but they were specifically approved, and we need to then take a look at those transactions because we still will need an audit opinion on those because that is a requirement. So we're going to need to try to still do that work. And so that is particularly important. The only other two things I did want to bring up to the board is I wanted to recognize a couple of people. I know for this IDEA work and trying to find these exceptions, and I'll probably butcher it, but surprisingly, I had identified an individual who is used to be in IT, but is in the HR function, Madhvi Derakonda, who I could not believe how helpful this individual was. So she's in HR, has nothing to do with this IDEA issue, worked straight through the weekend and even Sunday night with me trying to find these $5 million in adjustments. So just to recognize the amount of effort and the commitment this person had, it had absolutely nothing to do with her other than her desire to help out. So I just wanted to put her out there because that's the excellence that does exist in some people. And I wanted to make sure I was able to share that. Also, just wanted to note this MOA, MOU lift and looking at all of these documents and comparing and analyzing and costing has been quite an effort. And I just want to put a thank you out for my team, Jackie Farabell and Molly Kirchhoff, who have been breathing and living MOUs and MOAs for quite some time here, trying to figure out what are the numbers. So that has been a big effort. But at that point, that concludes my report.
Well, thank you, and this is an outstanding report, and thank your team also for the hard work they have performed. I guess my question to you is, I know the renewal is coming up for Nairaki Smith. Is that something we need to discuss tonight in executive session? Do you feel it can hold off until our next meeting?
It can certainly hold off until the next meeting.
Okay.
Oh, wait, are you talking about the next audit meeting or your next board meeting? Let me just clarify.
Next board meeting.
Okay, that's fine for that to happen for next board meeting.
Unless our vice president wants to go to executive session.
We are going in an executive session, Commissioner Clark.
Oh, we are?
Yes. So we could discuss it tonight.
Okay, so that sounds great. So basically for the first part of the executive session, I would request that Anissa be in that to give us her feedback on the work.
Okay.
Thank you. And I turn the gavel back over to you.
Thank you. Thank you. Great meetings. Commissioner LeBron and Commissioner Clark are very informative. Any new business? Having none, we need to go into executive session to discuss a matter related to employment of a particular individual and to discuss a matter related to the appointment of a particular corporation. And so at this point, it's two corporations. So before I entertain a motion, just want to say good night to our audience. We may be coming out, but there probably will be no other business for us to discuss. So we thank you for joining us and have a great evening. So can I get a motion to go into executive session? Can I get a second?
Seconded.
All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Good night, everybody. And
Vice President
Dr.
Elliott.
Myers Small.
Vice President